Okay, and we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Big AI Hackathon, co-hosted by Google and BigCommerce. This session is going to be about prototyping and deploying generative AI apps, and we're joined by Sagar, who is a principal technologist over at Google. And Sagar, I'm just going to let you take it away.
Yeah, sounds good, Katie. Thank you. Good morning, all. Welcome to day 2 of Hackathon. Hope you guys are having fun, especially with hacking things around e-commerce and AI. Today, my focus would be to talk about generative AI apps, prototyping, and deploying. What exactly this topic really covers? This topic is primarily about how you can get started with building or prototyping a generative AI app and then taking it to production or taking it to deployment. So that's going to be the primary focus of this session. We'll keep it a couple of slides just for the overview, but we'll spend most of the time looking at different applications or types of applications and how do we take from prototyping to deployment or from building something from scratch and taking it to production. So with that, let's get started. Uh, a quick introduction about myself. Sagar Kevalramani, Principal Technologist at Google. I focused on data journey. So what data journey really means is going from data collection, analytics, also machine learning AI. So that's about me. And you also see a barcode on the screen. That's my LinkedIn handle. If you want to connect with me or even reach out to me, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn apart from Slack. So with that, let's get started with a topic about generative AI apps prototyping and deployment. So I just want to bring everyone on the same page with this particular slide. Naresh yesterday already covered this slide as part of the overview of Google's Gen AI capability or Gen AI portfolio. What the reason I wanted to bring up this slide again is because I wanted to start talking about specific modules and how do we take those modules from prototype to deployment. So what you see here is different Gen AI capabilities. If we go from bottom to top, at the bottom we have our infrastructure layer along with the foundation models at the very bottom. Now these foundation models are available through different mechanisms or different channels in Google Cloud Platform. One of the ways is the APIs itself. So you can consume these foundation models directly through API. So if you are a developer and you are comfortable working with APIs, I think that's the most flexible way to start with foundation models. So you just call the API, integrate the API directly into your application, and that's it. And you don't have to worry about building any model from scratch. Now, if you want to get more help in that direction and do not have to worry about APIs, we do have way more other options too. We also have something called Generative AI Studio, which is more like a web UI, which allows you to create or experiment with generative AI as a technology, create a prototype in a UI, and the UI itself generates a code for you, so you don't have to worry about writing the code. You just copy that code and use it for your application. So we'll see that in action today in few minutes. The another capability also I want to talk about is Model Garden. Model Garden is a one-stop shop for Google's large language models as well as open source communities. Google Cloud, as always, takes a very open approach compared to some of the other cloud providers in the industry today. And Model Garden just justifies or fulfills the exact same vision of being an open cloud. So with Model Garden, you will not be able to see not only the Google's models or Google's large language models, but you will also be able to access open source models, and we'll see that in action as well. And once you see those models, you can also take it to deployment or take it to production, and I'll show you a few examples of it. If we keep on going up, we also have capabilities which are more like platform as a service and software as a service, where we can build generative AI apps with just few clicks. Like generative AI builder, app builder allows you to create a Gen app builder or Gen app application with enterprise search or a chatbot with just few clicks. These capabilities also come with a deployment option, so you don't have to worry about figuring out how to work with APIs and all because it's all part of the product. And same goes with some of our out of the box products like contact center AI, document AI, discovery AI, so on and so forth. These are also available with deployment options, so you don't have to worrying about taking to deployment because they already have deployment methods embedded within the products. So to summarize, We do have APIs to consume the foundation models. We also provide you a web UI to interact with the studio or build or experiment with the code. And then we also provide you a lot of models, both Google's models as well as foundation models to start experiment with Model Garden. And then we have uh, multiple applications which you can use to build Gen app builders, but they have their own deployment models built into them. So those are few options. So primarily today we'll focus on the bottom layer, especially with the API Studio and Model Garden, and show you different ways of deploying the models. So that's going to be the primary focus for today. I also want to start doing this discussion, especially with the use cases. Now, there are multiple use cases across enterprises, especially for Gen AI. Now, they can be very common or horizontal to e-commerce business as well. So, as most of us are focused on e-commerce hackathon as part of this. So, some of the common use cases, what you see in the industry, especially with Gen AI, first and foremost is consumption of the data or consumption of the information. You can also call it document search and synthesis or the intra-knowledge Q&A. Think about you have a large corpus of data and you want to search through that data, and while searching it, you want to make it conversational. That's exactly what Bard is doing, right? When you interact with Bard, it has seen large amount of data, and whenever you ask him a question, it goes and looks at his corpus of the data, and based on the corpus, it generates new data and send it to you in a conversation way. That's exactly what I'm talking about when we think about document search and synthesis. So it could be your first party data. Can you search and scrape through that data and find the relevant information? And while finding the relevant information, can you make it conversational? So those are two common use cases which we see in the industry with generative AI. Another common use case what we see is search and discovery. So think about you have this large corpus of data. Can you pinpoint the exact data amongst that? Now, these can also have multiple use cases like implementing a search on an e-commerce website, right? This is very similar to a Google search engine. How can generative AI help you do those things? So that's another very popular use case. Can generative AI help you augment the current search experiences? Also, one thing potentially you may have seen is can when I'm doing the search, can I start seeing summaries around it? So that's a search experience augmented by generative AI. So those are different areas. So we'll focus on some of these use cases and actually see how we can take it from prototyping to deployment. So with that, without further ado, let's actually get started and show you a few things in action. So the very first thing I want to show you is going to the Google Cloud Console and show you different ways how you can get started. So what you see here is I'm in a Google Cloud project. You can also see my project name here at the top. If I go into the hamburger menu on the left, you see all the product lists which are available as part of the Google Cloud platform. Now we'll go into the Vertex AI platform, which is the primary machine learning platform for Google Cloud. It also has been augmented with Gen AI capabilities, so we'll primarily focus on Vertex AI. Now, once we go into Vertex AI, which is the one-stop shop for machine learning, you have different modules within Vertex AI. The one module which can be your starting point for large models is Model Garden. So that's the one-stop shop for large language models, not only Google's models, but also open source models. Now, if you look on the left, we actually give you some very specific information on what type of models are available. Now, from the top, you can easily say that there are more than 80 models or 80 models available in this model garden. So you have plenty of options available here to start interacting with large models. You will also see we have done a great job in categorizing these models. So about 60 of them are related to vision models. What vision really means is can you translate or generate an image based on text? So text to image kind of models. So we have about 60 of them, which are image models, and they are very popular in the industry. We also have about 28 models related to language. That's the text generation part or conversational part or code generation part. These are all text related models, and that's why they fall under language. So those are different type of models, what you see here. You also see these models have been specialized on certain tasks. We have models which can be very good at doing embeddings. What's embeddings? Embeddings is primarily translation of structured data or textual data to more like vector representation for semantic search kind of use cases. Similarly, we have generation. So if you're looking for text or code generation, those models can be helpful, so on and so forth. So we have different those some of the models based on the use cases. We also have some models categorization based on the features. And this is very exciting because as you see here, it says that based on the feature of being an open source model, we have about 56 models. So more than half of the models, what you see here are open source models. And what Google is doing is Google is actually kind of curating those open source models for you, making it available in Model Garden, and giving you an enterprise security on open source models. So you're getting a flavor of both. You're getting the open source flexibility and adaptability, and you're also getting security of Google Cloud when you're adopting the open source models. You also see we provide notebooks for 50 plus models. So you have a code available for 50 plus models out of the box. So now this can be one of the ways to start prototyping some of the large models, right? So you can start with this notebook and you get a head start with working these models, and that could be one way to start prototyping and building upon a specific large model. We also have something called one-click deployment, which is one of my favorite features of Model Garden. So when I click one-click deployment, it actually filters the 8 models which have one-click deployment. If you are familiar with the open source community and the work which is happening over there, Llama has, which is introduced by Meta, has proven a lot of good results with interacting or generating text related models. So if you are interested in testing out Llama for your use cases, you don't need to worry about going and deploying and figuring out the infrastructure and all those things for you. Google is already done for you, so you can just click view details, and now we give you a one click deploy option. And as soon as you will click deploy, it just asks you like, hey, what model name you want to give to the open llama model. And we also have different versions of open llama, by the way. We have the 13 billion parameter, the 7 billion parameter, and 3 billion parameter. So you can actually select the choice or the model you are interested in, and you can give a model name. And once you give a model name, it will ask you the infrastructure where you want to deploy. So when I say infrastructure, it's more about the size of the machine. So as you can see here, it's asking me for an endpoint name. I'll just give an endpoint name, and then potentially it will ask me whether I do need a traffic split, like if for A/B testing kind of use case, or do I need a scaling option. This is also where I can define machine, how big machine needs to be. Now also think about these are large models, so you may have to not only give a CPU machine, but may also add a GPU to it. So we give you GPUs as well. And then once you have decided your options, so we'll just select a GPU, we'll do continue, and I can just click now deploy, and the model will get deployed in my environment. So with just few clicks, now you will have an open Llama environment secured for your enterprise to start playing or experiment with, or start prototyping an application for you. So that's one way of doing deployment in Google Cloud Platform. Now, for example, if you are interested in Open Llama, but you are more curious about how I can start tweaking that model or modifying it for my needs, we also give you this code. So you can click this open notebook, and it takes you to a serverless collab environment. It is very similar to Jupyter Live Notebook, and you can get the whole code here on how to deploy a open llama model. Now when you are doing the deployment, you also have flexibility to start tuning the model using something called as PEFT. So you can even tune the model or optimize it based on your use case. And that's how you can not only deploy an open source model, but also tune it and tweak it based on your use case. So that could be another way, maybe for more for advanced users, to start deploying a model with some tweaks which they want to accommodate as part of the changes. So that could be another way of prototyping an application. Now, not only we have OpenLlama, but we also have some other popular open source models available for one-click deploy. For example, Falcon is another popular model, or Stable Diffusion, which are text-to-image models, and BERT is the Google's model, which was open sourced a while back, more focused on text generation and text classification. So a lot of options available for you to get started. And if you don't have one-click deploy, you can always go with the notebook, and you can start deploying your own code by just starting with the notebook, which is already available as part of the code. So if you ask me, if I'm new to generative AI and I want to start building my or deploying my own model, I will definitely start with Model Garden to see what is available out there and start prototyping over there. So that's one option. The second option I want to talk about is the studio itself. So we have option of APIs, which we talked about, which is very useful for our developers who are very comfortable working with APIs. But how about if I don't want to go to API, I want some UI to work with them? So the second option which we have is something called as Generative AI Studio. And once you go to Generative AI Studio, we give you a UI to play with different options or different model types. And the same way we have categorized based on the modality of the model, like language versus speech versus vision. So we have the same modality here. So you can just click language models, and now we give you a UI to start playing with a text related model, code related model, or chat or a conversation model. And you can also go on the route of tuning the model. If I go to text prompt, it actually shows, gives me a screen of writing a prompt and then also some ways to tweak the prompt. To take one specific example, we also have prompt examples at the bottom. So you can always start with this example instead of creating your own prompt. So for example, we have this support called summary, which is a free form text, and it's a summarization of example. So I'm just giving a prompt saying then summarize the following conversation from agent's perspective. And this is the whole conversation. We will just go ahead and submit it. So this is how you experiment with the model. Now I have the summary. If I'm satisfied with the summary and I want to think about deploying this model for my application, I can just click this view code. This view code actually generates the code for me. And as you can see here, the whole code is the predict code is copied over here, and the response from this would be this response what you got here. So this is a Python code generated right from the UI, which you can start integrating with your applications. If you're more interested in a HTTP or REST endpoint, you can also look at the curl option, and it will give you the exact same code through HTTP integration or REST integration. So
Hey,
that's another
Sagar,
point.
sorry to interrupt. I think we can't see the screen you're referencing. We're still looking at the file. There we go. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Katie, for calling that out. Uh, okay, so let me take a few steps back and just to show you, and sorry, I missed sharing this particular screen. So what I was showing is the second option, which is our Generative AI Studio. And the Generative AI Studio gives you a way to start experimenting with large models. And once you click in, you get option to go through different modalities of large models. So it could be language, it could be the text to image model, which we talked about, or even the speech models. Once you go into language, we give you different options to generate the text or even have a conversation or even tune the models. We also have given some prompt examples for chat, text generation, so on and so forth. So you can always start from here. One of the examples, what we can take is the call summary. And when we look at the call summary, we just give a prompt here saying that summarize the following conversation, and we give the exact conversation here. And when I click submit, what this is doing is it's just processing the screen and I get a summary at the bottom. Now think about, you want to prototype this for an application and start integrating into an application. What we do is we also have given you this view code option where you actually get the code generated for you. So now here you can see my prompt is available here, the summarize option and the whole conversation. And once you deploy this model, when the predict runs, you get the response very similar to what you see here. So with just one click, now you have a Python code available which you can use within your applications. Another option, if you are looking more for HTTP or REST endpoint standpoint, we also generate that code for you, so you can get a head start on deploying or integrating this API call within your application. So multiple ways to start prototyping an application, start integrating within your environment. So that could be a potential way when you're experimenting something. You start with UI, then you just generate the code and you get a head start in deploying that application. So these are a couple of options. We talked about Model Garden, and then we talked about Apps or Gen AI Studio. So those are more from getting started from scratch, and then getting a head start by using UIs or by using something called as click to deploy, which where the model gets deployed automatically for you using the Google scalable infrastructure. Now, what I also want to show you is some other options which you can potentially use for deployment. Now, think about you are comfortable with APIs. You have a clear vision of building an application for your e-commerce, and you want to get started. One of the common ways I usually do is start with a notebook. So Google also provides something called as Workbench, which allows you to create a fully managed Jupyter notebook instance where you can start writing your code. And when you get to notebook, you can just do a create new, and with just few configurations, you can now just click create, and you will be able to deploy a fully managed instance of your Jupyter Lab notebook. So let me actually switch the project to go to the notebook where I have few examples deployed for you. So I just switched the project, and I have a notebook deployed as GenAI Python 3.10. So we'll just click Open Jupyter Lab. As soon as you click the Open Jupyter Lab, it just opens the Jupyter Lab instance in a web browser for you. So now you have a fully managed instance. Now I use this notebook primarily for my experimentation purposes or working with different use cases or building use cases. So you will see a lot of content here. But one specific use case I want to talk about is maybe writing an application from scratch and how to prototype it and even deploy it. Now, this particular application, I'm going to share the code with you. It's already part of the hack pack, and I'll reference where exactly it is. But what this application is doing is we are using combination of Google's large language models along with BigQuery. Now, if you're not familiar with BigQuery, BigQuery is Google's cloud scale data warehouse. So it allows you to store the data and query the data. And then we'll also use an open source component called as LangChain. Now, LangChain is primarily about orchestrating things within a large language model. So think about you have step one, two, and three, and I want to integrate all these steps like one, two, and three. I can use a chaining concept called as LangChain. So it allows you to create that chain within the environment. So I'm using that. I'll show you why exactly I'm using it. So here is the a use case what we are trying to do here. Think about I'm a user who doesn't know SQL query. And then I can use large language models to help me generate a SQL query which I can run on BigQuery. So that's the use case. So as a user, I will come to a interface where I will write a human prompt saying that, hey, please generate a SQL query for this particular thing, like calculating the number of invoices or calculating the sales for this particular product in the month of August 2023. So I'll just give a human kind of prompt to the machine. What machine will do is machine will take it to the large language model and generate a SQL query for me, and then once the query is generated, LangChain will take it to the database and run it for me. So I'm still giving one single prompt, but LangChain is doing the orchestration. It's actually doing two steps for me. First is contacting LLM to generate the query, and then contacting database to write or run that particular SQL query. So it's a two-step process which is being orchestrated. I think this is a great example of, or a pictorial example of it. So what we do here is we install some binaries or dependencies or packages which you require. We also install LangChain and SQL Alchemy. Now, SQL Alchemy is a way to interact with databases using Python. So we'll just do that. And then uh, I've defined my project name and the location. And this is where I start writing a code. So started initializing my LangChain, and I've initialized few functions to interact with this. Now you can actually copy paste the whole code because these are all like templated code. So you can just use it for any applications. And this is the template, and let me show you the exact meat of the code so that you don't have to worry about understanding. So this is for the first thing. I'm actually initializing LangChain to interact with my large model. So here is the model name defined. So I'm interacting with the text bison model. Now this code is also very modular. If you decide to go from text bison to another Google's text model, you can just change the model name. So from bison to maybe gecko or maybe unicorn if you want to do that. And then this is where I'm actually in defining my data set with whom I'll be interacting. So I'll be interacting with the data set called as Iowa leaker sales. So it's a leaker sales data set which is available in the Google's public data set or Google public data set repository. Now, one of the value of this data set, or the reason I picked this particular data set, is because it's closely relates to a retail environment. Because this is a liquor store in Iowa, so this can kind of go along with any kind of retail or e-commerce system. And if you see the fields in this table, these are very similar to any retail transactional fields, right? Like date, store number, the address of the store, what was the item sold, how much quantity was sold, what was the sales dollars. So very similar to any transactional retail example. And now this is exactly the function which is actually doing the interactions for me. So I have written a prompt here telling to my large model that, hey, you are a BigQuery expert. Based on the input, go and generate a SQL query for me. And I've just done it in a very fancy way. What LangChain will do for this for me is it will take this prompt, take the input I'm giving, and give it to the large model to generate the SQL query, and then come back with the output. So here is an example. What you see here is I'm just running it for you. Count the total number of invoices. So I'm giving a human kind of question to the machine to generate a SQL query and also get the response. As you see, LangChain is generating a chain of steps for me. This is the input what is going from my side. So the question was count total number of invoices. The LangChain or the large model generated the SQL query for me. So select count star from sales. And then this is the result what it got from BigQuery or from that database. Let's take another example, but little bit more complex. So I'm asking him the question of what were the total sales for Conti Dallas in 2022. Now you can see here I'm specifying the exact county name as well as the year. So I'm giving him two different criterias. Now what the model does is it's actually calculate it puts an aggregation function called a sum because I'm asking him the total sales. Then it's also intelligent to put a where clause for me on two fields. One is Dallas and also one is the date. So that's another example. I think the last example which I have is a very interesting one. So what I have asked him to write a SQL query to extract the month date from the date field. So I'm asking him to take the month from the date field. So it has to do some kind of division amongst the days. So it has to be intelligent. And then I'm also asking him the monthly sales for a particular product in 2023. So once I run this particular query, the model will go back, ask this question to the large model. The large model came up with this complex query. So it used the extract function to write the or generate the month from the date, and then it also put the item description and also the date criteria what we talked about. So a interesting way to use large models to generate SQL queries for you, and also using LangChain to go and interact with you. So this is one prototype which we can use. Now if I want to start exposing this, I don't want the users to go through all this technical code. What you can also do is you can actually put a UI on top of it. So the way I do put a UI is by using another open source Python package called as Gradio. So it's a free package which is available in the open source community. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to put a UI on top of this experience. So it's a very simple code which can write a UI for you with just few lines of code. This is all just comments, so you can completely ignore it. With just few lines of code, you can actually have a UI to interact with the large language model. So if I run this code, it actually generates a web UI URL for you. So as you can see here, a URL is generated. So I'll just click the link. It takes me to this UI. So now I have a UI which I can expose to my users for experimenting with my product, or even I can do a production deployment of this application. And this gives me a very similar experience. So, for example, if I ask the question, count total number of invoices, now you don't have to show all the Python code behind the scene. This is running behind the scene, going and running or generating the SQL query and showing you the output. So the output is like this were the total number of invoices, and this was how the SQL queries were generated. You can we'll do the last example again. So in terms of like extracting the month from the date field and then also generating the sales for a specific product. And now I have the answers for January. These were my sales. For February, these were my sales, so on and so forth. So I now have a UI in front of my large language model for interaction. So this can be very helpful for creating like a conversational experience or a search experience on top of your first party data set. Now, where you can find this particular code, this is available in the hack pack. So if you go to the hack pack and if you go to the section of hackathon prep, you will actually find this code over here. It says that getting started with LangChain on BigQuery. So that is the code what we just reviewed. I have another interesting code called as PDF Q&A link to. Now this code all does exactly similar things, but on a PDF document. So think about, you have a PDF document or first party data set, and you want to do a Q&A on top of it. The code is very similar. And at the end of the code, what you do is you start asking the questions. So for example, how many office space reduction took place in 2023? And the code will go and start identifying the information. So in this case, it will actually find that 500 million information from that document. So that's a way to interact with documents. And the first example was interacting with a database. So a couple of examples of taking from prototype and putting a UI in front of it to make it accessible for your users. I know I'm on time. The only one last use case which I will tell you is also one of the more complex use case which can be used for different applications is the search and document synthesis for a whole enterprise, or think from a large scale perspective. So what I want to show you is another application which we have built, and I'll show you the architecture of this in a bit. Now, by the way, you can also interact with this particular architecture. I'll share the URL for this architecture on Slack so that you have access to it. What this is doing is we have built a GenAI powered application using something called as embeddings and matching engine. Now, what embeddings is think about, you have this large corpus of data and you want to make that corpus of data searchable. So that's where embeddings comes in. It translates your data into something called as vectors, and that makes semantic search possible. This is exactly the concept how Google search operates. So we use embeddings and something similar to matching engine behind the scene. Now, what is matching engine? It's a vector database, very similar to open source Pinecone or FAISS. It allows you to store that vectors what are generated through embeddings. So why you would do that? Think about if you are looking for a way to make search on a corpus of data. It can be a text search or image search. You can actually use this. And once the search is complete, you can summarize that using large language model. So for example, if I want to search for maybe a Python code to write to cloud storage, as you can see here, it's taking as I'm prompting, and I already have the results. So what it did is this is basically a corpus of Stack Overflow. It has about 8 million items, and as I was typing it, it was able to search along based on the keywords I'm putting in. So for example, if I say Spark code, as you can see here, the response is coming instantaneously, and all that is coming through matching engine. And you can see here the search results of Stack Overflow code, about Spark code, and so on and so forth. Another interesting example is the text to image search. The example or the data set what we have used is for a retailer called as Mercery. This is a multinational retailer. I think they are based out of Japan, and they use Google Cloud, and they are a referenceable customer. What we have done is we have implemented their search engine using this technology. So, for example, if I search for T-shirt, you can see here it retrieved the results for me. So I'm doing a text to image search. This
Do you
is
want
so.
to add this to the screen? Sorry, you're just not sharing a screen.
Oh no.
Or do you want to?
Um, Oops. I don't know why it
No
stopped
worries.
sharing. Cool. Okay, do you know where exactly it stopped sharing?
It stopped sharing like a minute ago. I just thought it was intentional.
Okay,
Um,
got
so
it.
I don't, yeah, I think right here is perfect.
Okay, so this use case is more about search using embeddings and matching engine, and we'll put this link. You can also access this UI, by the way. So I'll put this link in Slack. So the first example is for text search, and the second is text to image search. For the text search, what I'm showing here is a repository which has Stack Overflow code or Stack Overflow dataset. We have downloaded about 8 million posts from Stack Overflow, and now I've built or put the search engine on top of it. So what you can do is just search for what you're looking for, like the way you will do on Stack Overflow. You will also realize that it does the search instantaneously. So as soon as I search for Python, you can see it's a lot of Python results. I can refine the search maybe for write Python for writing into cloud storage. As you can see here, as I'm typing, it's refining the results for me, and within a matter of milliseconds, it's able to retrieve 44 results from 8 million dataset, which are relevant to the Python code for cloud storage. So you can build this using Vertex AI matching engine and embeddings. We also have made that code available in GitHub, so you will have access to that. Another powerful use case of this is text to image search, which can be very common for e-commerce companies or enterprises. So think about, you want to provide a search experience to your customers. In this case, we are taking an example of a real company called Mercery. Now, Mercery is a public referenceable for customers, and that's why we are using their data. We have indexed Mercery's product catalog into this particular database, and what it powers you to do is something called text to image. So, for example, if I search for T-shirt, you can see here it started pulling out T-shirts for me. Now it's also very intelligent. So, for example, if I go from T-shirt to T-shirt, so maybe from singular to plural, you can start seeing the results have changed. And now I'm seeing the images which have multiple T-shirt as part of it, because I look for plural versus singular. So that's the power of this vector database, which is available within Vertex AI. Another example is, think about if I say dancing people. Now it's a way to describe people, and as you can see here, you can all have all these images which have dancing people on them. Now the interesting thing is it's not only reading the text which is part of the search, it's also indexing or understanding the images or the content of the image which is part of that product description. So it does both the embeddings of text as well as images. So another powerful example of using generative AI to deal with the first corpus of data to discover it, and once it is discovered, you can always summarize it or make it available to your users through Gen AI. So, the way to take it to production or prototype this is also the code is available. Oops. So the code is available. So this is the way you can prototype or build this application. So it's all built within Vertex AI. We are using the workbench to index the data from BigQuery and cloud storage, putting it into a vector database called as matching engine. And a UI or front end is hosted in a Docker environment called as Cloud Run. And this code is also made available to you guys as part of Hackpack, and I'll put that link in the Slack group. So those were a few examples of taking an idea and go from prototyping to basically deployment. So with that, I will conclude my session here and see if we have any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. But like any of these talks, if you have questions, if you watch this asynchronously, or if you come up with a question in a few minutes, feel free to drop those in the Slack channel. If you're not in the Slack already, definitely get in there. It's a really great resource to be able to talk to Sagar and Naresh from Google and the rest of us from Big Commerce and the rest of everyone from Google to ask questions about these things. So thank you so much, Sagar. This was really awesome.
Cool. Thank you, Katie, and thank you all.
All right. And we'll see you guys in the next session. Bye.
Bye.